Welcome to the Crypto and Blockchain Talk.
Hello.
Hey.
Guten Tag.
Aloha.
Hola. Shalom.
Hello.
Namaste.
Ni hao.
Privet.
Hello.
Salut. Yassas.
Salve.
Ciao.
Bonjour. Our podcast talks about the latest trends in the worlds of cryptocurrencies and the blockchain.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Crypto and Blockchain Talk. And on this episode, well, it's a very, very special episode because I actually have a dear friend on this week's episode, and he is none other than Jonathan Tycko. And Jonathan is one of the founding partners of the law firm Tycko and Zavareei, and they are based in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States of America. So, before we go any further, Jonathan, welcome to Crypto and Blockchain Talk.
Thank you, Aviva. Glad to be here.
I am really excited that you are with us on this podcast and that you're just joining me in general because you're just such a cool person. So, what I want to do is, in the first instance, well, actually what I want you to do is I want you to explain to the listeners exactly what kind of law you practice. And then it'll make sense why we are talking about the topic of whistleblowing and the cryptosphere. So go for it, Jonathan. Tell everyone what you do for a living.
Well, okay. So I'm a lawyer in the United States, and in the U.S. we have a number of different laws that protect and incentivize whistleblowers. And through those laws, whistleblowers have the right to go to the government with information about various types of unlawful conduct and law breaking and fraud. And if they do that in the right way, which usually does require the involvement of an attorney, but if they do that in the right way, and if the government recovers some money from the wrongdoers as a result of that, the whistleblowers are actually paid a reward, and those rewards are quite large. And so part of my sort of area of practice is representing those types of whistleblowers who are normally corporate insiders or industry insiders.
Wow. Well, there's a really good reason why we have you on Crypto and Blockchain Talk this week, and that's because it seems that the SEC has been awarding quite a bit of money, as you already said. It's quite a lucrative thing, especially if you're inside a dodgy organization. I mean, what a way to make money. But the SEC has apparently awarded more than $900 million over the life of the program, but $85 million to 9 individuals this month alone. And one case, a whistleblower earned $28 million. I mean, that's got to be some serious fraud going on there. I mean, do you know anything about that case?
The awards that the government pays are a percentage of what the government recovers. So sort of by definition, the bigger the fraud, the bigger the reward. So in the SEC cases, sometimes we will learn information about what those cases are about, but sometimes we won't. So it really depends on sort of what information kind of is made public by the SEC, or sometimes by the whistleblowers themselves will sort of go public with their award.
Oh my God. That must have been a whopper then, that 28 million to one whistleblower. That whole case.
Yeah.
I mean, does it not pay off then to kind of help the fraud along? And then at the very last hour when the billions have raked in, that you then blow the whistle so you get a bigger percentage? I mean, wouldn't that make sense? I mean, just help the fraud along and then go, oh, wait a minute, this is really wrong. And then you blow the whistle.
Well, as you might imagine, there are rules for all of these whistleblower programs, and some of those rules sort of go to exactly that issue. So if you can't commit the fraud yourself, turn yourself into the government, and then expect the government to pay you an award. That generally doesn't work. But if you are somebody who is involved in the fraud at more of a low level, so what I normally say is, like, if you're the foot soldier, you're not the general, or if you're the cog in the corporate machine, but you're not the CEO, then those people are often really the best whistleblowers from the government's perspective because they actually have real inside information about what is going on, and they can really help the government with the investigation. So if you're involved in the fraud or the other wrongdoing at that level, again, sort of at a foot soldier cog in the machine level, you probably can file one of these whistleblower claims, and if it is successful, be paid a very large reward. But no, you can't just kind of you can't sort of create a new fraud, run it, and then expect to be paid an award. No, it doesn't work that way.
So one of the things that I read, and it obviously mirrors exactly what you said about, these whistleblower awards ranging from between 10 to 30% of the money collected, when apparently it exceeds $1 million US, or is it any amount of money? Did I read that wrong?
So what you're describing there is the SEC program. That's the securities laws program in the U.S. for securities laws violations. So that one, you're correct about the range, and you're correct about the $1 million kind of minimum. There are other programs run by other agencies that have slightly different ranges. So it depends on the program.
And they've made it very clear, I guess, on the SEC program that the rise of both the crypto marketplace and crypto scams are one of the leading causes of these record-breaking figures, but apparently they can't always supply information, like you also said, regarding these cases for whatever reason. So it's kind of frustrating for somebody like me who wants to know it's all well and good to say, yeah, all this money's being paid out. It would be actually kind of good to know where this fraud was being committed and what projects, because I think that's a pretty key piece of information for people in this fledgling market to have at hand.
And in most cases that you can figure that out, because the SEC, when they actually file a case against somebody, that is public information. They will often announce that through a press release, the actual filings, the court filings, all of that is public. What isn't always public is the reward to the whistleblower part of it, but the actual enforcement actions that the SEC brings, those are public, and there are quite a few of them that have been brought in recent years that are connected to cryptocurrencies in various ways.
Let me ask you this. You said that there was a number of different programs, which sound like almost a Venn diagram, where it could be the fact that a whistleblower complaint could cover different administrative units within the U.S. government. Would that be the case? Can you actually get whistleblower money from different offices within the U.S. government? I mean, does that happen?
Yes, that does happen, because often whatever the wrongdoing is, it could violate more than one law, and different agencies just have jurisdiction over different laws. So, in the cryptocurrency world, for example, the SEC has jurisdiction in situations where they conclude that the currency is a security, which sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. But then you have the CFTC, that's the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which has jurisdiction over commodities and derivatives. And in a number of cases, the CFTC has concluded that certain types of cryptocurrency transactions are within their jurisdiction, and they also have a similar whistleblower reward program. If there's tax fraud involved, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, has a whistleblower program. And there's a new one that was just started earlier this year that covers money laundering issues that is going to be administered by the Treasury Department. Any one of those, I think, could be implicated by various types of cryptocurrency schemes, depending on exactly what was going on.
Jonathan, I'm sitting here laughing butt off. You know why? You need to come up with a bingo card. Because I think there's going to be some crypto scams where you can literally do the clean board swipe. You could literally get every one of those agencies and you could probably pick up the money laundering, the commodities. You could probably pick up every single one of these infractions and just do a full sweep. I think you should come up with the Tycko and Zavareei bingo card. For sure. You need to come up with this thing where basically if a whistleblower wants to come to you and wants to see what they can possibly get from exposing, I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking about some of the projects that we've actually reported on, some of these scams, right? And I'm thinking, wait a minute, okay, so that would cover it, and that would, oh my God, I've got bingo. I mean, okay, money laundering.
Right.
Okay, so one of the first things I want to talk about in my research before we did this podcast, which I always do research before my podcasts, I uncovered this notice of covered action. So first of all, what is a notice of covered action?
Well, I think what you're referring to here is a notice that is issued. I think in this case, the one you're referring to, I think, is the Coinbase case.
It is.
And it was a notice that was issued just recently, a couple of months ago, by the CFTC. And so that is part of this whistleblower reward process. So the way the process works is that at the front end, the whistleblower goes to the agency with the information, their information, and they provide that information to the agency. Then the agency is going to go out, conduct an investigation, decide if the laws were broken. If they decide that they were, the agency will then approach the company that's accused of the wrongdoing and either work out a settlement, or if they can't work out a settlement, sue them in some respect. But at the end of that, when the agency actually recovers money from the target of that investigation, at that point, they then issue one of these notices of covered action, which is their way of signaling back to the whistleblowers, hey, we recovered some money. If you want to make a claim for your reward, now is the time to do it. Because what you don't know as the whistleblower going in is whether you're the only one. I mean, like this case, Coinbase, obviously a fairly large company at this point, publicly traded, right? We all know about that. So whatever the wrongdoing was at issue here, and I think this probably had something to do with taxes and derivatives trading by Coinbase, I think it was. But there may be other whistleblowers, and you don't know that when you go to the government agency. So there are cases sometimes where there could be multiple whistleblowers who have come to the agency with information. And then at that point, the agency might make rewards to more than one whistleblower out of that same pot of money.
Well, this is an interesting one because, okay, so this notice of covered action, and you guessed correctly, it's the one about Coinbase. Yeah. Now, in the first instance, it says award claims due no later than the 22nd of June of this month. So, I mean, right. There's some time to still, I guess, claim against Coinbase. So can you just explain that here?
That's not a date for people to make claims against Coinbase. It's a date for people to submit claims to the agency for a whistleblower reward. So the only people that could do that legitimately would be people who have previously filed a whistleblower, it's called a tip with the CFTC. So this is really only directed to people who have previously filed whistleblower tips with the CFTC. So if you haven't done that, this is not for you, and there's no way to make money at this point.
Okay, so everyone stand down from writing your emails. It does not apply to you.
Yeah, this is the very end of what you're looking at, this notice of covered action. That's the very end of a long process that probably started a number of years ago.
Well, it's it's interesting because I'm just wondering, of course, it's like you said, you don't know how many whistleblowers are coming forward on this thing. And it looks like and I know I've talked about this before on previous podcasts because I find it really confusing that on one hand, there's, because this all started way before they listed on the stock exchange. Yeah. Before that happened, right. All this was going down. Right. And, look at the charge that's been leveled against it. And they're actually trading on the stock markets false, misleading, or inaccurate reporting and wash trading. I mean, talk about not adding legitimacy to an ever questionable marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, what it suggests to me is that the government's investigation of Coinbase started with a whistleblower who came to the CFTC, or maybe the CFTC and the SEC, with information about the wash trading,
right? Which
seems, if you kind of dig into the CFTC's press releases about this, it looks like that was the thing that they were primarily concerned about. But so somebody came to the agency with that information as a whistleblower. And, that is often the situation. A lot of these agency enforcement actions, they start with a whistleblower coming to them because Otherwise, they don't really have any visibility into these companies, particularly companies that are not publicly traded and don't have to make any sort of disclosures to these agencies. If you go back 2 or 3 years ago, the CFTC, the SEC, they had no visibility inside of Coinbase. And the only way they would have found out about something like this is through a whistleblower. And that is the really valuable role that whistleblowers can play in sort of taking an industry that is, a little bit like the Wild West right now, I think, but is moving more towards legitimacy and stability. And part of that process is sort of weeding out the bad actors. And hopefully at the end of that process, you have companies that are at least trying to comply with the law. Now, obviously, big giant banks that have been around for hundreds of years still get accused of violating the law. So nothing is ever perfect. But certainly whistleblowers can play a big role, I think, in kind of bringing legitimacy to the cryptocurrency world.
Well, I mean, look, you're certainly right about banks. And from what I understand about wash trading, by the way, I mean, it's basically fake trades from what I understand, just so that people understand what wash trading is. Pretending to enter into transactions that give this appearance that trades or sales have been made.
Basically trading back and forth so that from your perspective, it's a wash. You end up with the same asset you started with, but you've created a series of trades that make it look like there is active trading going on.
I mean, it's not like a company's going to go and say, hey, we're doing this. It can only be through whistleblower action that something like this could actually be taking place. And this is a massive company, Coinbase. I mean, they've got 1,300 employees now at Coinbase, and they're growing. So if you have, like you said before, a large organization, you've got a lot of foot soldiers, and one of those foot soldiers may not be comfortable with the environment they're in. But if it's a small company, because a lot of crypto companies, they're quite tiny. We're talking about like 10 or less employees. You've got a lot of projects out there that are even 5 and less employees. So it's a little harder. Wouldn't it be a little harder to try to kind of mask not just disappointment in operational activity, but also say, hey, I'm not involved in this if it's like a very small crew, which most of these crypto projects are.
Yeah. I mean, certainly when we look at when whistleblowers come to us and we're giving them advice about whether to pursue one of these whistleblower reward programs, one of the things we will always look into is who are the potential targets of the government investigation, and is that target really going to be there at the end of the day? So if you have a small operation that's only 5 people, particularly if it's outside, if that operation is outside the United States, very difficult to enforce judgments against them and so on and so forth. Even if that whistleblower has legitimate information of wrongdoing, they might ultimately conclude that it's not really worth the effort and the exposure to actually pursue one of these whistleblower reward programs. So the identity of the potential target of the government investigation is certainly important, and certainly sort of 2 things we're looking at primarily. How large is the entity? Are they still going to be there at the end of a 2 or 3 year government investigation? Or are they just going to disband and disappear? And then do they have assets inside the United States that the U.S. government could actually collect against?
Have you ever heard of a whistleblowing case where it was literally a 2-person company? Is there any such thing where it's a he said, she said? I mean, can you actually have that kind of a thing where you have 2 people, one reports on the other?
I mean, that's not the typical case, but certainly, I mean, the one thing that's sort of a little bit different about the cryptocurrency world is that, yes, some of these operations are small, but they can generate huge amounts of money very quickly. And so the targets are not always companies. They can be individuals. So if you have an individual who has just accumulated a large amount of wealth, that individual could become a target. But the hypothetical you're positing that it's literally a 2-person company, I mean, that would not be the typical case.
Now, we're talking about the SEC or the CFTC or one of these other organizations, IRS. These are all U.S. organizations. Okay, so let's just say you're not a U.S. citizen, but you are aware of infractions occurring in companies which are obviously illegal, but you're not a U.S. citizen, but it's in a U.S. company. Are you still eligible and I think the answer is going to be yes, but I don't know, are you still eligible to give information and be rewarded under the whistleblower program?
Yes, you are, as long as you're blowing the whistle on violations of U.S. law.
Now, when you say U.S. law, because some of these projects, even though they're not based in the United States and they're based overseas, have U.S. citizens who are investing in them. So does that make the ground any less firm if it's a overseas company but with many U.S. investors or not? Or does that not enter into it? Does it have to be a U.S.-based company?
No, it doesn't have to be a U.S.-based company. If an overseas company is engaging in transactions covered by U.S. law, and that could be transactions with U.S. citizens, then they could be covered. Absolutely. And in fact, that exact issue is something that is often at play in these cases. For example, particularly cases against exchanges,
right,
where the question is the exchange processing transactions for U.S. citizens?
Mm-hmm.
If they are, then from the perspective of the U.S. government, they should be registered with the appropriate agencies in the United States, and they have certain reporting obligations and so forth. And so that there have been instances where companies outside the United States that are engaged in running an exchange for cryptocurrencies have tried to sort of segregate their U.S. customers and either force them into sort of separate U.S.-based exchanges or just exclude them from the exchange altogether. But that's very difficult to do. It's hard to know where these trades are coming from. People can sort of hide their IP addresses in various different ways. So that actually is a sort of a live issue right now with some of these agencies. But just to kind of answer your question sort of simply, if you're doing business with U.S. customers, you're probably subject to U.S. law in some way.
Well, you just mentioned exchanges, and there's another interesting and timely article about Binance and how the CFTC's inquiry could be damning for them. And of course, Binance, somebody's reported on Binance, a whistleblower, and it's looking like they are being investigated for circumventing their own internal controls, and they're helping to funnel customers and revenue to the main Binance exchange. And these are U.S. customers, and they're not supposed to be there. Just to be very, very clear, U.S. customers are not supposed to be on the main Binance exchange, but they are helping them get there. So this inquiry, again, the CFTC, you obviously, that you could actually get rewarded for, it started at $1 million, wasn't it, for the SEC that you said?
Yes.
So what's the amount for the CFTC? Because if we're talking about Binance and we're talking about the amount of money, and Binance is worth billions upon billions of dollars, how would they actually measure then with this what the amount of the award would be? Because, they are trading billions of dollars now every month. So first of all, how is this even going to go forward? Are they going to also come out with this notice?
Maybe you know more about this than I do, but I don't know that we know right now whether this Binance investigation is the result of a whistleblower. Do we?
Yeah, apparently it is. According to Forbes, an internal whistleblower denounced the exchange's practices of aiding U.S. customers in circumventing their own internal controls to help funnel customers and their associated revenues to the main Binance exchange.
Okay, so there was an internal whistleblower. The question, I guess, is, did that internal whistleblower go to the CFTC with that information through the CFTC's whistleblower office? We don't know that. That would not be public at this point. But let's just assume that that is how that investigation started. Mm-hmm. So if that's right, and I wouldn't know that one way or the other, but if that's right, then yes, that person would then eventually become eligible for a reward as long as the amount that the CFTC recovered was more than $1 million. It's subject to that same limit as the SEC. Then the whistleblower would get somewhere between 10 and 30% of whatever amount the CFTC ultimately received from Binance. But now I don't know what that number will ultimately be. I mean, that's a question of like CFTC substantive law and about what the facts of that particular case are, and I just don't know it.
And who knows if we'll ever actually know the details, just like we were talking about before. So you mentioned before about money laundering. And of course, it's very hard to kind of prove all of these money laundering allegations against many people because there's layers and layers of ways of hiding your information.
This new money laundering whistleblowing program is really directed at the companies that are engaged in trading or transmitting the crypto. It's directed at entities, right? And if those entities are participating in essentially sale, trade, or transmission of cryptocurrencies. So that could certainly be the exchanges, but I suppose there could be other entities involved in that. You would know that better than I would. But then those entities might be subject to what's called the Bank Secrecy Act under U.S. law.
Right.
And what that statute requires is that if you are subject to that statute, if you are what they call a money service business, an MSB, then you as that business are required to have what's called an anti-money laundering program, an AML program. Mm-hmm. And you are then required to make various reports to the U.S. Treasury Department, including what's called a suspicious activity report, a SAR.
Right.
And this whistleblower provision is really directed at those entities. So what people would be blowing the whistle on is not necessarily the underlying money laundering itself, but it's on the entities and whether the entities themselves are complying with these AML and SAR requirements. So for example, if you were a cryptocurrency exchange and you were doing business with U.S. customers, but you did not have an internal anti-money laundering program and you were not filing suspicious activity reports with the U.S. government, then the U.S. government might see that as a violation of the Bank Secrecy Act and come after you. So that's really what this whistleblower provision is targeted towards, I think.
Okay, well, it's actually interesting you talk about that because in the UK, they just reported today that there's up to 50 different companies who may actually be forced to close because they have failed to meet the UK's anti-money laundering requirements. What advice would you give to someone who said to themselves, I think I'm in a pretty precarious / sketchy situation, and I'm not sure what I should do. What would you recommend?
Well, being a lawyer, of course, I would say call a lawyer and get some advice. I mean, I will say, like, the lawyers like me and folks at my firm and other firms like us, you know, we almost all will do consultations with clients like that without expecting any payment for that. So that essentially they're sort of free, confidential evaluations to just help that person decide what to do. Because these are, you know, there's a bunch of complicated issues like, is the company really violating the law? Are they violating U.S. law? Which agency would you go to with this information? And if there is an agency that you can go to with that information, then it's sort of like, how do you do that? I mean, each of the agencies has their own process that you have to follow in order to preserve your right to receive a reward at the end. And then the information you have has to be packaged, has to be handled the right way. It has to be presented to the agency the right way. So I would say, you know, like I said, our law firm and certainly other firms like ours that specialize in representing whistleblowers in the U.S. will generally be happy to talk to somebody like that and do an evaluation and give them some initial advice without any expectation of payment. You know, I would say a couple of other things. One, don't wait too long. Timing matters for a number of reasons. One is that the agencies themselves are just much more interested in sort of active ongoing frauds than something that happened 3 or 4 years ago but is kind of over. They're just not going to throw their limited resources at something like that unless it's particularly huge. So there's that. There's the question of, you know, you want to come to the agency with something the agency doesn't already know from some other source. You want to be the first whistleblower in the door, not the fifth. So there's a number of reasons why timing matters. Lastly, I would just say that the other thing that an attorney can help you with is thinking about evidence, because if you go to the SEC or the CFTC or the IRS with some story about some huge fraud that's going on, they're going to ask the question, well, we're not just going to take your word for it. What do you have to show us that proves that this is really happening? And attorneys are trained to sort of understand those evidentiary questions, how to properly preserve evidence in a way that the agency will understand and accept. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why getting some advice early on is useful. And sometimes that advice is, no, don't file one of these. It's not worth your time, or you don't really have the right information yet. But that's what I would say is sort of the right steps to take.
So, Jonathan, I also want to just congratulate you on a really great article that was published in the National Law Review, which is about cleaning up crypto. And I'm going to put the link in the description of this podcast, which will, of course, be published on all the podcasting platforms where Crypto and Blockchain Talk streams on. This is a fantastic article. It looks like it's a hot topic, obviously, because it's being picked up and people are reading it, and I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is a key enforcement priority for all of these government agencies. They're very interested in hearing from whistleblowers in this space. And yeah, if you read my article, Cleaning Up Crypto, I think the subtitle is How Whistleblowers Can Stop Cryptocurrency Scams, Money Laundering, and Tax Evasion and Make Money Doing It. It's published on the National Law Review website and also on our firm's website, which is fraudfighters.net. I'm allowed to make a plug for my website.
Of course you can.
You can find it in either place. And that article sort of summarizes a lot of what we've been talking about today. So it's sort of a useful resource for somebody who might be thinking about blowing the whistle and just wants to read something and think about it a little more.
No, that's really fantastic. Well, look, Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for coming on to Crypto and Blockchain Talk. I think our listeners will have learned a lot. A lot of people are like me. They just like interesting topical pieces, and you've definitely explained and cleared up a lot of questions that people may have had revolving around this. So again, thank you so much for coming on to Crypto and Blockchain Talk. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Aviva. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I'd love to have you on again.
Whenever you want me.
Woohoo! I'd like to thank everyone for tuning into this week's Crypto and Blockchain Talk. I would like to ask you, please, to tell your friends and family to download our lovely podcast on one of the many podcasting platforms, which are listed on cryptoandblockchaintalk.com. There are, of course, many different podcasting platforms which are listed there, from iTunes, Podbeam, Stitcher, Spotify, etc., all the way to SoundCloud and Verbal. But if you cannot find a podcasting platform that is available near you, just type it into the search engine of your choice, because we are now streaming on over 70 different podcasting platforms. In addition, this interview will be streamed on our sister radio station, Crypto 24 Radio. That's crypto24radio.com, playing around the world 24/7, 365 days a year. Furthermore, we love to hear from our listeners very, very much. So you can get through to us on our social media accounts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But the best way of getting through to us is through email. We love to hear from you directly. So please email us at education@savvydigital. That's education@savvy, S-A-V-I-I, digital.com. Again, thank you for tuning in. You have no idea how much we love having you as our listener, and we truly know how busy your day is. You choose us. You have no idea how happy it makes us. So please be safe, take care, and goodbye for now.